Hello and welcome to Orion Corpus, where we'll be sharing interesting stories ranging from history to mystery and a whole lot in between. Join me for the first episode of Mysterious Incidents, where, as the name implies, I'll be going over stories and events which are shrouded in mystery. Today, I'll be talking about the strange disappearance of one of the most recognizable names in aviation history, Amelia Earhart. When talking about famous aviators, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't heard of Amelia Earhart. Her name is up there with the likes of Orville and Wilbur Wright, the aviation pioneers generally credited with the invention of the world's first motorized airplane, and Charles Lindbergh, a world-renowned, record-breaking aviator. Born on July 24, 1897 in the small town of Atchison, Kansas, Amelia would grow to gain a thirst for adventure alongside her sister Pidge. Her interest in aviation, however, wouldn't truly start until her early 20s when she would attend an aerial meet in Long Beach, California. There, she went on a passenger flight with Frank Hawks, who would go on to be a famous air racer. That flight would alter Earhart's life forever. Shortly after, she would recruit a female flying instructor, Netta Snook, and have her first flying lesson on January 3, 1921. Half a year later, she would buy her first plane, a Kinner Airster single-engine biplane which she would nickname the Canary. A year and a half later, she would fly to an altitude of 14,000 feet, setting her first record as a female pilot in the process. A little over 6 months later, and Earhart would become only the 16th woman in the United States to receive a pilot's license. Due to a number of financial difficulties, Earhart sold the Canary and began trying out a number of ventures until she became a member of the American Aeronautical Society's Boston chapter, where she would later be elected president. In 1927, the same year Charles Lindbergh became the first to make a solo, non-stop transatlantic flight, Earhart would fly the first flight out of Denison Airport in Quincy, Massachusetts. In 1928, while at work, Earhart received a call. On the other side of the phone was Captain Hilton H. Rayleigh, and he asked, "Would you like to fly the Atlantic?" Thus setting the stage for her ascension to not only a famous aviator, but a prominent public figure of her time. Although it would be pilot Wilmer Stoltz and co-pilot Louis Gordon to fly the airplane, as Earhart didn't have the experience for such a long flight or enough knowledge of the plane's instruments, she still received her fair share of fame from the flight. Shortly after returning, Earhart set her sights on a new goal, becoming the first woman to fly solo across North America and back. In August of 1928, she would earn that title. She would then go on to compete in a number of aviation races and challenges, setting a world altitude record of 18,415 feet along the way. Now, almost 2 years after her flight across the Atlantic with Stoltz and Gordon, and with more experience and accolades to her name, Earhart endeavored to once again make history by being the first woman to fly solo on a non-stop transatlantic flight. On May 20th, 1932, Earhart took off from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland, with her only companion being a copy of the Telegraph-Journal, confirming the date of her takeoff. She encountered mechanical problems along with strong northerly winds and icy conditions. 14 hours and 56 minutes later, she touched down in a pasture in Northern Ireland, achieving her goal of becoming the first woman to fly solo, non-stop across the Atlantic. This achievement earned her a number of awards, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Gold Medal of the National Geographic Society, thus cementing her name in history as a famous aviator. Just about 3 years later, and Earhart would become the first aviator, male or female, to fly solo from Honolulu, Hawaii to Oakland, California using a Lockheed 5C Vega. On her next record attempt on April 19, 1935, she flew from Mexico City to New York, being met with a large crowd upon her arrival. Participating in many air races, Earhart found that her trusty Vega, which she had dubbed Old Bessie the Fire Horse, couldn't compete with some of the performance-built aircraft she was competing against. After setting many women's speed and distance records in a number of different aircraft, including her Vega, Earhart began to search for a new aircraft to achieve her greatest feat yet, to circumnavigate the globe. She began assembling a team for this purpose, including her husband George Putnam, who would publicize Earhart's endeavor, and Paul Mantz, a stunt pilot whom Earhart wanted to partner with to improve her own flying skills. She would begin planning for this flight in early 1936, while working at Purdue University as a technical advisor for its Department of Aeronautics. In July of that year, with financial aid through Purdue, a Lockheed Electra 10E was built for Earhart with multiple modifications to increase fuel range. As a navigator, Earhart chose Harry Manning, a skilled navigator, pilot, and radio operator. However, after a number of practice flights where Manning's navigation was off by roughly 20 miles, Mantz and Putnam decided she needed a better navigator. Fred Noonan was chosen, as he had experience with both maritime and flight navigation, along with celestial navigation, which would be extremely useful on this type of flight. Originally, the plan was to fly from Oakland, California to Honolulu, Hawaii. From there, Noonan would navigate west toward Howland Island, the most difficult portion of the flight. Then Manning would take over as navigator until Australia, where Earhart would continue on her own for the remainder of the flight. This attempt began on March 17, 1937. From Oakland, Earhart was accompanied by Noonan, Manning, and Mance, now her acting technical advisor. However, upon reaching Honolulu, the aircraft's propeller system began to experience issues, and the aircraft needed to be serviced. 3 days later, the flight was ready to proceed, but during takeoff from Luke Field, where the plane had been repaired, the landing gear collapsed, causing extensive damage to the aircraft. Some witnesses claimed they saw a tire blow, while others, like Mance, cited pilot error. Feeling that there were too many problems with the attempt, Manning left Earhart's team, leaving her with only Noonan as a navigator. This left a gap in navigation ability, as neither Earhart or Noonan were skilled radio operators. While her plane was being repaired, the flight path was revised. Instead of flying westward, they would now be flying on an eastward route due to wind and weather pattern changes. When the aircraft was repaired and funds were secured for a second attempt, Earhart and Noonan flew from Oakland to Miami, Florida, where Earhart announced her plans for an around-the-world flight. Earhart and Noonan took off from Miami on June 1, 1937. 28 days later, on June 29th, the pair landed in Lae, New Guinea, after making multiple stops in South America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. Of the planned flight's 29,000-mile route, they had now completed 75% of their goal. Going forward, the 7,000 miles remaining of the journey would be almost entirely over the open, vast Pacific. On the morning of July 2, 1937, Earhart and Noonan left Lae Airfield with their destination, Howland Island, a small flat island in the middle of the Pacific, 2,556 miles away. This would be the last time Earhart or Noonan were ever seen. From here, Earhart would report in via radio about altitude changes and position, with her last known position report being near the Nukumana Islands, only 800 miles into the flight to Howland Island. Stationed at Howland Island was the U.S. Coast Guard cruiser Itasca. This ship was meant to aid Earhart and Noonan in locating Howland Island through radio transmissions. During the flight's approach, the Itasca reported hearing Earhart, identifying herself with KHAQQ, her call sign. Unfortunately, she was unable to hear their replies. Earhart reported in a number of times regarding the weather, but it wasn't until 6:14 a.m. on July 2nd when the Itasca received a transmission stating that they were within 200 miles. Earhart would request the ship to use its direction finder in order to provide a bearing. Unfortunately, the ship's radio transmitter could not tune in to the frequency used by the aircraft. The Itasca's radio logs would show, Earhart on northwest, says running out of gas, only half hour left, can't hear us at all. We hear her and are sending on 3105. S500 same time constantly. Just a few minutes later, another log would state, KHAQQ calling Itasca, we must be on you but cannot see you, but gas is running low, but unable to reach you by radio, we are flying at about 1,000 feet. A following transmission at 7:58 a.m. had Earhart requesting the Itasca to send voice signals so she could get a radio bearing. This signal was reported by the Itasca as being in the immediate area of Howland Island, but as the Itasca could not send voice signals on that frequency, they tried to use Morse code. Unfortunately, neither Earhart or Noonan were proficient in Morse code. Her final transmission at 8:43 a.m. said, we are on the line, 157337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6210 kilocycles. Wait. Believing they were close, the Itasca used her boilers to generate a smoke signal, but due to the dark clouds and shadows on the ocean surface, it is believed Earhart and Noonan never saw them. The official record states that the 8:43 a.m. transmission was the last time Earhart was heard, and they likely crashed into the Pacific, lost at sea. After an extensive search of the area around Howland Island, and even a number of other nearby islands including Gardner Island a couple hundred miles to the south, nothing was ever officially found. The search for the renowned aviator and her navigator was ended on July 19, 1937. There are a number of theories about what truly happened to the flight, along with plenty of conspiracy theories. Some reports indicate that there were transmissions after the 8:43 a.m. transmission. While many of these reports were proven to be hoaxes, there are a number that seem to be legitimate. One such transmission indicating that they had either crash-landed or safely landed on an island in the area, widely believed to be Gardner Island. A thorough search of the island showed no signs of Earhart, Noonan, or the aircraft. However, a skull and bones believed to be that of a woman were found a few years after the incident, along with a number of artifacts which could have belonged to Earhart. But this wasn't enough evidence to confirm that her and Noonan were ever on the island. Other theories say that they were either shot down by the Japanese near the Marshall Islands or crashed on Japanese-controlled Saipan, becoming captives. However, these theories seem to be unfeasible, as Saipan is 2,700 miles away from their target of Howland Island, and the Marshall Islands were nearly 800 miles away. Conspiracy theories range from her spying for FDR over the Pacific, that she had turned back mid-flight and disappeared, or even that she was successful in her flight and assumed another identity following the project. Whether they were lost at sea, as the official narrative says, they crashed on Gardner Island or another nearby island and survived for a time, or they were captured by the Japanese, the fact is that the final resting place of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan remains a mystery to this day. Thank you for listening, and I would appreciate any sort of feedback you have to offer, as this is my first video and I understand the audio and video quality aren't amazing. I would appreciate any sort of constructive criticism. Thank you, and see you next time.